The forgotten beginning, long before the arrival of Adam, before mankind was shaped from clay and breathed into existence, the earth was not silent. It was not an empty stage awaiting its destined actors. The valleys, the oceans, and the skies were alive with forms of life that modern history does not record. They were creatures unlike any that roam the world today. They ruled not only with strength, but also with knowledge, and their presence carved deep impressions into the memory of the earth. In those ages, the mountains were younger, the rivers wider, and the forests darker. The air carried a weight that was different from the world humans know now. It was heavy with moisture and energy, as though the very sky still remembered the storms of creation. The seas stretched endlessly, and within their depths lived colossal beings, whose movements stirred waves that could swallow entire islands. Some rose above the water with bodies that glistened like molten stone, their voices echoing across the coasts like thunder. On land, creatures of astonishing intelligence walked the plains. They were not beasts driven only by hunger or instinct. They built and destroyed, they gathered and dispersed, and in their eyes burned a strange awareness. Some say they were formed from fire, their bodies shaped by the raw forces of the earth. Others believe they came from realms unseen, placed upon the world to test its balance before the creation of man. Whatever their origin, they held dominion. The oldest tales speak of the Jinn, beings of smokeless fire, swift in movement and powerful in will. They roamed freely, filling the mountains and deserts with their tribes. They had the ability to think, to plan, and to build. They raised great fortresses of stone that vanished with time, leaving only scattered ruins buried beneath layers of sand and soil. In their pride, they saw themselves as eternal rulers of the world. But the Jinn were not alone. Other mysterious creatures shared the earth with them. From the shadows of dense forests emerged towering forms, neither beast nor man, with features so strange that even imagination struggles to describe them. Some bore wings that spanned across valleys, others had scales harder than iron, and some were said to command the elements themselves. They were creatures of raw power, and their rule was often cruel. They hunted without mercy, and their battles with each other shook the land like earthquakes. Generations passed, and these rulers of the world began to forget their purpose. Instead of gratitude for their dominion, arrogance filled their hearts. They shed blood without reason, waged wars for territory, and corrupted the very earth they had been entrusted with. The skies grew darker with smoke from their endless conflicts. Rivers ran red, and fertile lands turned into wastelands. The balance of the world was collapsing, and the harmony of creation was breaking apart. It was during this time that the angels, watching from above, raised their voices. They questioned why such destructive beings were allowed to walk the earth unchecked. They saw the endless wars, the tyranny, and the cries of weaker creatures silenced under the weight of the strong. They feared that the earth would be ruined beyond repair. The heavens trembled with their plea, and their words carried to the throne of the Almighty. Yet even in the midst of destruction, not all of these mysterious creatures were wicked. Among them were those who sought peace, those who turned away from bloodshed and lived in solitude. They withdrew into caves, forests, and remote islands, hiding from the corruption of their own kind. They became witnesses of history, silent keepers of secrets that the world would later forget. But the tide of events was already turning. The rulers, who had once believed themselves eternal, were facing the limits of their reign. Signs appeared in the heavens and on the earth. Great storms swept across the seas, swallowing entire tribes. Earthquakes shattered their cities of stone. Fire burst from the ground, consuming their fortresses. One by one their empires fell, and their dominion weakened. What remained of them was scattered. Some perished, leaving only fossils and fragments buried deep within the earth. Others were cast into unseen realms, their voices fading into whispers carried by the wind. A few lingered, hiding in corners of the world, unseen yet not entirely gone. Their presence became stories, their power turned into legends, and their names blurred into myth. The world, though scarred by their reign, began to heal. The rivers cleared, the forests regrew, and the sky slowly regained its calm. But the memory of those who ruled before Adam remained. It lived in the stones, in the bones, and in the tales passed down by the oldest tribes of mankind. And so, even before the first man opened his eyes to the light of creation, the earth had already known rulers, kingdoms, and the fall of mighty beings who believed themselves invincible. This was the forgotten beginning, the untold chapter of creation, when mysterious creatures walked the earth and claimed it as their own. It was the age before Adam, an age that ended not by accident, but by decree, preparing the world for a new chapter in its story. The rise and fall of the first rulers, the world before Adam, was not silent. It was a stage already marked by the presence of rulers who believed the earth belonged only to them. They moved across valleys, deserts, oceans, and mountains with an authority no other creature could challenge. They built domains, raised fortresses, and filled the land with their signs. To those who came after them, their works would become buried mysteries, but in their own age they were monuments of power. The Jinn, born from smokeless fire, were among the most dominant of these rulers. They were fast, cunning, and gifted with strength that no beast could rival. They formed clans and tribes, spread across the earth, and established territories as wide as kingdoms. Some among them were scholars of hidden knowledge, able to harness forces of nature. Others were warriors who measured their greatness in conquest. For centuries they lived without any fear of being replaced, and the thought of another creation surpassing them never crossed their minds. In their early days, the Jinn were not all corrupted. Many of them lived with order, cultivating the land, shaping tools, and organizing themselves under leaders. They had a society of rules and traditions, and for a time there was balance. The seas and forests remained full, the skies clear, and the rivers untouched. They were entrusted with the earth, and for a while they guarded it well. But pride has always been the seed of ruin. The longer they ruled, the more arrogance grew among them. They began to fight for supremacy, tribe against tribe, ruler against ruler. Blood was spilled upon the earth without need, and wars tore their lands apart. Fortresses that had taken centuries to build were reduced to rubble in a matter of days. The air grew thick with smoke, and the cries of the fallen echoed across valleys where once peace had reigned. Their wars were not fought only with weapons of stone and fire. They had knowledge that could twist the world around them. Some called upon the forces of wind and flame, others bent the waters to their will, and some sought to control the very creatures of the earth. Beasts larger than houses were tamed and unleashed upon enemy tribes. Winged forms blotted out the sun during battle, and storms were summoned as weapons. The earth trembled under the weight of their endless struggle, and creation itself seemed to cry out in despair. Among the Jinn were leaders whose names became feared. They claimed titles of kings and rulers, demanding worship from the weaker among them. Their palaces rose on mountain-tops, their banners stretched across vast deserts, and their courts were filled with arrogance. They did not see themselves as caretakers of the world, but as gods of their own domains. Those who opposed them were crushed, enslaved, or driven into hiding. Yet even within their ranks, there were voices that called for restraint. There were Jinn, who remembered the purpose for which they had been created, who urged their people to abandon bloodshed and return to justice. These voices were often silenced, ridiculed, or exiled. Some withdrew into isolation, living in caves, mountains, or deep forests, where they sought refuge from the corruption of their kind. These were the witnesses, the silent few who observed the rise and fall of their people without taking part in its destruction. The corruption of the Jinn was not hidden from the heavens. The angels, watching the earth, saw the bloodshed and tyranny spreading without end. They questioned why the earth was filled with such beings, why they were allowed to bring ruin upon creation. Their voices rose in complaint, and the echo of their plea reached the throne of the Almighty. The balance of the earth was broken, and change was being prepared. But the Jinn were not the only mysterious beings who lived before Adam. Ancient stories and forgotten signs point to others who roamed the earth alongside them. Some were described as colossal beings of stone and fire, creatures whose bodies towered like mountains and whose footsteps shook the ground. Others were winged forms who soared above the seas, watching over entire coasts like guardians or predators. Some legends speak of scaled forms, half serpent and half beast, who ruled the rivers and lakes. These beings were feared not only by the weaker creatures of the earth, but even by the Jinn themselves. The wars between these mighty rulers were unlike anything the world would later see. The skies burned with fire, the seas boiled with fury, and the ground cracked open under their battles. Mountains were split apart, valleys reshaped, and rivers redirected by the force of their conflicts. Their wars left scars upon the earth, scars that remained long after their empires were forgotten. As ages passed, their corruption became unbearable. Their pride grew without limit, and they began to declare themselves eternal masters of creation. They enslaved weaker creatures, forced them into servitude, and shed innocent blood for sport. The cries of the earth grew louder, and the balance that had once existed was lost. The end of their reign began with signs. Great storms rose from the seas, swallowing entire tribes. Earthquakes shattered their fortresses, leaving their cities in ruins. Fire burst from mountains, consuming those who had thought themselves untouchable. One disaster followed another, and the mighty rulers began to realize that their time was ending. Some tried to flee to hidden realms, seeking safety beyond the reach of destruction. Others buried their knowledge and treasures deep within the earth, hoping they might be found in some future age. A few sought forgiveness, retreating into solitude and abandoning the ways of pride. But most clung to their arrogance until the very end, refusing to surrender, even as the world crumbled around them. Their empires fell, their voices faded, and their memory was buried beneath the soil of the earth. Yet they did not vanish completely. Some of the Jinn remained, scattered and weakened, living in shadows away from the eyes of mankind. Other creatures passed into realms unseen, their existence continuing in ways hidden from human understanding. And the ruins of their age, though buried, remained as silent witnesses to their dominion. The earth healed slowly. The rivers cleared, the forests grew once more, and the skies regained their calm. But beneath the surface, the stones still remembered. Bones, carvings, and fragments of their forgotten civilization rested in the dark, waiting for those who would one day uncover them. This was the rise and fall of the first rulers. They had power, knowledge, and dominion, but they wasted it in arrogance and bloodshed. Their story became a warning, a lesson written into the very foundation of the earth. The world had been ruled before Adam, and it had seen greatness consumed by pride. The time was approaching when a new creation would be brought forth, one that would carry a different purpose. But the memory of those who ruled before him would never be completely erased. The decree of change, the fall of the first rulers, did not happen in silence. It was a storm that shook the heavens and the earth alike. Their cries, their wars, and their arrogance rose like smoke, filling the world with corruption. The angels, who were appointed as watchers of creation, lifted their voices to the Almighty and said that the earth had become stained with endless blood. They questioned why beings who spread only destruction were allowed to rule. They feared that the earth would never know peace as long as these creatures held dominion. The Almighty, in his wisdom, had already decreed the end of their time. He had allowed their rise so that their true nature might be revealed. And now their fall would open the way for something new. The earth would not remain empty after their ruin. It was being prepared for a creation unlike those who had come before, a creation that would carry both weakness and greatness, mercy and pride, but also the ability to repent and to return to the truth. This creation was man, who would be brought forth through Adam. But before Adam was placed upon the earth, the corruption of the Jinn and the other mysterious beings had to be subdued. The angels were commanded to strike against the most violent of them. Armies of light descended upon the earth, not with cruelty but with justice, to cleanse the land of those who refused to abandon their tyranny. The battles between angels and the rebellious rulers of the earth were unlike anything seen before. The skies were filled with blinding light, the ground trembled beneath the force of their descent, and the proud creatures who had defied their purpose were driven back in fear. Many of the Jinn were destroyed in these battles, while others were cast into distant realms, where they could no longer bring ruin upon the world. The survivors scattered, some fleeing into deserts, mountains, and oceans, while others swore loyalty and obedience in hopes of being spared. From that day onward, the Jinn were divided between the obedient and the rebellious, between those who accepted the will of the Almighty and those who still burned with pride. Among the latter was one whose name would never be forgotten, Iblis. Iblis had been among the Jinn who rose high in knowledge and worship. He had gained a position of honor, so much so that he was counted among the company of angels, though he was not one of them. His devotion seemed unmatched, and his knowledge was vast. But deep within his heart, pride slept like a hidden fire, waiting for the moment to ignite. He watched the fall of his own kind, yet he believed himself superior to them, untouched by their corruption. He thought himself worthy of eternal honor. The cleansing of the earth continued until the cries of war grew silent. The mighty fortresses of stone were abandoned, their towers left to crumble beneath the weight of time. The colossal beasts that had once darkened the skies or shaken the valleys disappeared, some destroyed and some hidden away in places no human eye would ever see. The world was left scarred, but it was also renewed. Rivers flowed again, forests stretched across the land, and the sky opened with a calmness it had not known for ages. The stage was being set for a new story. The angels, however, still questioned. They remembered the corruption of the Jinn and the arrogance of the other rulers. When the Almighty declared that he would create Adam to dwell upon the earth, they asked with humility, "Will you place upon it one who will spread corruption and shed blood as those before him did?" The Almighty answered with words that silenced their doubts. "I know what you do not know." With those words, a mystery unfolded. Man would be different from the rulers who had come before. He would not be made of fire, nor of forces beyond the reach of the earth. He would be shaped from clay, humble in origin, fragile in form, yet carrying within him something greater than strength or power. He would be given knowledge, the ability to name and to remember, and a heart capable of mercy and repentance. He would stumble, but he would also rise again. Unlike the rulers before him, he would not be bound to arrogance without escape, for he would be given the gift of forgiveness. As preparations for the creation of Adam began, whispers spread among the remaining Jinn. Some watched with curiosity, others with resentment. They could not understand how a creature of clay, weaker than themselves, could be chosen as successor upon the earth. Their pride, already wounded by their fall, was struck again by this decree. Among them, Iblis nursed a hidden flame of envy, a refusal that would soon shape the destiny of mankind itself. The earth, though cleansed, still carried the remnants of its earlier rulers. Deep beneath mountains lay bones, larger than any animal known to man. In valleys hidden from human sight rested ruins of forgotten cities. In the depths of the oceans moved shadows of creatures whose kind once ruled openly. They were the echoes of a lost age, silent reminders of what had been before Adam. Their time was over, but their memory lingered, and so the decree was set. The world would no longer belong to the mysterious creatures who had filled it with arrogance and destruction. A new creation was to rise, one with the potential for both greatness and weakness, one whose story would surpass all others. The age of man was about to begin, but the lessons of those who ruled before him were written into the very stones of the earth, waiting for those who would one day uncover them and wonder about the forgotten rulers who once walked before Adam. The new dawn of creation. The earth had been prepared through ages of trial. The mysterious rulers who had once filled it with arrogance and violence were removed from their thrones. Their time was over, their empires scattered, their names erased from memory except for fragments that remained in hidden corners of the world. The scars of their battles were still carved into the earth, but the land itself was now silent, awaiting the next chapter. The Almighty commanded the angels to gather the soil of the earth. From mountains, valleys, deserts, and fertile plains, they collected clay of many colors. From this mixture, the form of Adam was shaped. Unlike the rulers who came before, Adam was not made of fire or shadow. He was not born from storms or created as a beast of colossal power. He was shaped from humble earth, yet within him was placed the breath of life, the soul that carried knowledge, awareness, and the capacity to choose. The angels watched as the new creation stood before them. They bowed in obedience when commanded, honoring the wisdom of the Almighty, who had fashioned Adam with care. But among those present, one refused. Iblis, who had once risen high among the Jinn, looked upon Adam with prideful contempt. He saw only clay, weakness, and mortality. He could not understand how this new being born from earth could be chosen above him, who was made of fire. His pride turned to envy, and his envy became rebellion. The refusal of Iblis marked the beginning of a struggle that would last until the end of time. He was cast out, yet he swore to lead Adam and his children astray. He declared that he would whisper to them, deceive them, and turn them toward the same arrogance that had destroyed the rulers before them. He would make them forget their purpose, as the Jinn had once forgotten theirs. His vow was not the vow of a warrior, but of a deceiver, and it was accepted as a test for mankind. Adam, unlike the rulers before him, was given a special gift. He was taught the names of all things, the knowledge to recognize, to remember, and to create meaning. The angels, upon witnessing this, understood what they had not known before. Adam's greatness did not lie in raw strength or eternal pride, but in the knowledge and mercy that had been placed within him. He was capable of error, but also capable of repentance. He was fragile, yet through that fragility he was closer to humility, and through humility closer to his Creator. The world that Adam entered was both new and old. It was new because it had been cleansed for his arrival, yet old because it still carried the memories of those who had ruled before him. Beneath the soil lay the bones of giants. In the depths of caves lay carvings and symbols that told of forgotten empires. The oceans hid shadows of creatures that no man would see, and the deserts covered the ruins of fortresses once raised by proud rulers. These remnants were silent, but they were not gone. They were lessons written into creation, reminders that arrogance brings only ruin. As Adam and his descendants spread across the earth, they would occasionally stumble upon these remnants. Fossils buried deep within stone, ruins hidden beneath sand, strange shapes carved upon forgotten walls. To mankind, they appeared as mysteries, puzzles of history, and legends of old. Some would dismiss them, others would weave them into stories, and a few would recognize them as signs that the world had known rulers before man. The Jinn who survived the great cleansing continued to dwell upon the earth, living in places unseen by mankind. Some remained faithful, submitting to the will of the Almighty, while others followed Iblis in rebellion. They became hidden companions of the human story, sometimes deceiving, sometimes guiding, always watching. They were no longer the undisputed rulers of the earth, but they remained as reminders of the age before Adam. Thus, the cycle of creation turned. The mysterious creatures who once filled the earth with terror and arrogance were replaced by a creation that carried both weakness and greatness. The fall of the first rulers was not the end of the story, but its beginning, for it set the stage for mankind to rise, to be tested, and to walk between the path of light and the path of pride. The earth itself remembers. Every mountain, every sea, and every desert holds within it echoes of the past. The winds that sweep across ruins carry whispers of those who ruled before Adam. The stones buried in darkness keep the secrets of forgotten ages. And mankind, as he looks upon these mysteries, is reminded that he is not the first to walk upon the earth, but he is the one entrusted with it now. The lesson of the creatures who ruled before Adam is clear. Power without humility leads only to destruction. Pride without gratitude ends in ruin. Dominion without justice is stripped away by the decree of the Almighty. The rulers before Adam believed themselves eternal, but they were swept away like dust. Their downfall became a warning for mankind, so that he might not repeat their errors. Adam's story was the dawn of a new age, an age in which man was given choice, knowledge, and mercy. Yet the shadows of the rulers who came before remain, not as living kings, but as echoes and reminders. They ruled once, they fell, and their memory lingers in mystery. Their story is part of the earth, and their downfall opened the path for the creation of man. And so, before Adam, the world was never empty. It was alive with beings of power and mystery, rulers who believed themselves unshakable. But only the Almighty decides who rules and who falls. Their empires turned to dust, their pride turned to silence, and their names turned to myth. What remains is a lesson carved into the foundation of creation, waiting for mankind to see, to learn, and to remember.